Tim, thanks very much for giving us some time this morning. We're just
No worries.
talking about church planning itself and not simply what's going on, but the question, how successful is church planning? Now, before we get into things, would you be able to give us a bit of an idea of, you're about 3 years down the track now at Box Hill?
No, we'll be 2 in July.
You see, you just look
Yeah.
too mature for me to actually
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
what I want to ask is 2 years on then, you're not
Yep.
in the early days, you're not running around. In fact, you're not just building with a core group, maybe. You've actually got a sign of what the congregation is going to start looking like. So what is the difference with who you started with and who you have now?
Yeah, well, when we started, we just started at the beginning of 2012, gathering a core team in the lounge room. I think we had 15 people, 9 adults, and a bunch of kids and babies. So it was very small. We met there for 6 months, and then I had the idea we might grow to about 30. We didn't. We grew to about probably 20, including kids. But we wanted to launch out, so we launched out anyway. It was only then that we started to see some growth, and we were able to have some impact in some of the different communities we were trying to reach out to. We probably grew to about 30, 35 pretty quickly. It's only really been this year that we've really bumped that up to about, I think the last 2 months we've been averaging over 60 at church. So that's been slow. It's taken us a long time to get there. But also really nice, the situation we're in. We no longer feel like we're not sure if we're going to be here each week. Even on the low weeks, a long weekend, there'll still be enough people there that it's not depressingly small the way that perhaps it was in those early days when we first started. So that's exciting. So that's where we are now. Most of our congregation, we've got a couple over 50, but everyone else is under 45, so we're very young. We're mostly young adults and students. We're very multicultural, which is our area as well. So that's probably dominated by Chinese people. We've probably got more Chinese faces at church than Anglo faces now, which is good. That's nice. So that'd be the new thing.
Well, that actually gives me another point to ask a question, because I'm wondering what are the particular strains associated that you've experienced, particularly in the first couple of years for Box Hill. So as opposed to just church planning itself, what has Box Hill brought to the discussion?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Well, 41% of people in Box Hill were born overseas, and the majority of them come from mainland China. That's what we've experienced. So it's really a hub for Chinese people all across Melbourne. That's where all the Chinese shops are. My hairdresser doesn't speak English, and there wouldn't be many places in Melbourne or even Australia where you'd find that sort of situation. So that's been exciting. It's certainly been a growing experience for me to learn about Chinese culture. I mean, Chinese people are lovely, and often those who migrate here, they're doing it at great cost. They're desperate to learn English, desperate to make friends with Australians, desperately lonely. Often their parents are funding their move, and they're hoping to bring their parents over from China. And so that creates all sorts of needs in our community, and many of which a Christian community actually just naturally addresses, because we are a warm, welcoming community to be able to reach out to them. So in some ways, I think I've spent the last 2 years learning about Chinese people and Chinese culture and all sorts of things associated with that, which has been great. We've got really wonderful Chinese friends now, which is a great blessing. So that's been really good. We started an English class in the local library where we do an English lesson, do a Bible study, and then pray for the people that come along. And that's been a wonderfully strategic thing. We get sort of 16 students each week with a fair degree of turnover, but we've had a whole number of people come to church through that ministry. So that's been one of the best things we've done. And it's been good. It's been good. It's always a challenge when English becomes a barrier to relationships, but I think we've been able to work through those pretty well, and we've now got a really vibrant multicultural dynamic at church. We do 4 o'clock church. We actually wanted to meet in our community hall in the morning. We wanted morning church, but there's an Indian spirituality group that already had it booked, so we met in the afternoon. We do dinner together afterwards every week, bring a plate to share, and if you know much about people from Asia, food is just such a big deal, and so we've been able to utilise that. That's lovely. It means people hang around for a few hours after the service finishes.
Now, you've just touched on some of the spiritual,
Yeah,
I guess, competitive ideas that are going on in Box Hill.
yeah.
How would you characterise spiritualism? You're also pretty,
Yeah.
close to a major city. How do you characterise the spiritual identity of the area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did some stats when we first moved down, and we found out that 60% of Victorians ticked "I'm a Christian" on their last census form, but in Box Hill that's only 41%. Now, obviously, I don't, you can interpret those stats how you want. I think 22% of Australians ticked "no religion" on the census form. In Box Hill, it's 31% or something around that. So already we had a feeling that. Box Hill was different to most suburbs across Melbourne. I found, particularly amongst young people, there's a real apathy about religion. Amongst Chinese people, there's an interest in it. There's a strong secularism, but also a real superstition that's quite inbuilt in their culture. It's very interesting. There's a Chinese proverb that most Chinese people will know that says, "Man was created good, but because of his environment became bad, and through education can become good again." So for many Chinese people, education and learning is actually a moral good, and so that's an interesting thing that I've kind of come to learn. But they're really interested in learning and absorbing information, particularly coming from an authority. So if we run a course, come and hear what Jesus says about life. And we'll fill the room full of Chinese people, and we have done, and that's what we've done, because they want to know what Jesus has to say to them, because they're learning and increasing their knowledge. And whereas it's very hard to get Australians to come to something like that, really inoculated to the gospel message. So that's been a sort of a spiritual thing we've noticed. It's hard, but this is another thing we've learned. It's really hard work. Evangelism. We had a guy who became a Christian about a month and a half ago. Now his name is Jackie. Moved to Australia. He's got his permanent residency. He's working here now. Highly educated. But we read the Bible for 12 months before he decided to become a Christian. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not sure if he could have come to faith 12 months ago. He didn't know enough. He didn't know anything. And when Billy Graham came and did his big crusades down here in Melbourne, still the biggest crowd at the MCG, most people that got up and went up for the altar call already went to church.
Yeah.
There was nothing else to do on a Sunday, back in those days.
And
even
culturally, that was part of who it was to be Australian at that time.
Yeah, that's right. And really, Billy Graham perhaps just kind of put the pieces together for people. And, even in Acts 2, when Peter gives his speech, nobody interrupts him halfway through and says, "Wait, who's Moses? And which God are we talking about?" People today in Australia just have so much further to come. So that's something we've found. And I think we've had to reassess our views on evangelism. It's just really slow and relational. You're sharing your lives with people. And not just with Chinese people, but now with young Australians. They don't have a church background. They've just got so much further to come. So we've started having a long-term view, which I think has been helpful.
Well, Tim, that leads me into another question. Has it actually reinforced your conviction that church planning is the way to go? Because evangelism, absolutely, but there are lots of different ways to do it. I mean, there could be parachurch ministry, there could be all sorts of things. But you've tried to integrate yourself into a particular culture. Is church planning the way to do that? Is that how you've seen the success of that?
Yeah, look, I think it is one way. I've got property envy of all my mates who are working in big denominational churches around the country and have just phenomenal multi-million-dollar facilities that they can do things in. We're hiring community hall, scraping by. But one of the great blessings about church planting is you can actually design everything from the ground up around how you can reach a community that you want to reach. You don't have, 100 years of reaching people in a certain way that perhaps doesn't work anymore, but people are still very tied to. So we kind of started from scratch. We saw people that weren't being reached or weren't being reached adequately. And so even my week as the pastor, I can think, well, I've got no commitments, no school boards that I'm expected to be on. no committees that I have to run other than the ones I set up. So it's actually a great blessing. So I could go and do something like our English club on a Thursday night in the local library. Every week I'm sitting and talking to people who don't know Jesus about him and reading the Bible with them. A lot of my friends who are pastors or ministers in other big established churches, they're actually so flat out with Christian ministry, they don't have any time for non-Christians at all. And many of them complain to me about that, whereas I can actually build that in to my week as a strategic thing, and other people at church see me do that and they can prioritise in their own lives as well. Hey, I should be spending time with non-Christians in my life too. So that's actually a wonderful blessing about starting a fresh ministry.
So being able to tailor everything you do, not simply to the culture, but to the purpose that you want to bring the culture, into Christ.
Yeah, that's right, and that even plays out in small things like, there's a whole lot of really healthy things about, or things you have to do in a church plant that you don't have to do in a big church, but are actually really good, like welcoming new people. I mean, if we don't grow, we are dead. If we don't welcome new people, that's it. We're all packing up. If we don't get new people along, if we're not meeting people, if we're not doing evangelism, if you're in a church of 200 people and you don't welcome new people, it's no big deal. Nobody's going to know. It's no big deal. They'll still put their money in their plate and come next week. So that actually creates a really healthy culture. And hopefully, as we grow, some of those building blocks we put in place, like if a new person walks in, we're all over them, can keep going, and we can keep doing that.
Well, let's talk about that, because on the one hand we can say, okay, church planting is is one of the key ways to go ahead. We've got to plant churches, but it's not just about planting churches, is it? I mean, it's not like just coming up with a congregation that's shaped like a little sort of Chinese community here and another one there. Would you say that they've actually got to be a certain style of congregation? Not style, that's the wrong word. That they've got to have a certain focus, and that focus actually has to be outward.
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, Mark.
Oh, okay. Well, you wouldn't be the first, Tim. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, people have said to me, why start a new church? There's plenty of struggling churches. In fact, heaps of churches. Why not try and help them get better? And that will be a great thing to do, and care for the Christians in those churches. But, in the end, those Christians are probably already going to heaven. And we have millions of people in my city who don't know Jesus and probably will never walk into a traditional church. And perhaps if they did, I'm not even sure whether they'd hear the gospel in some churches, which is really sad. And it's funny, someone said to me, look, it'd be a great thing to go to a kind of big denominational church and turn it around, that had lost its way, and turn it around. It might take a whole generation to do that. It might take your whole life, but you could kind of turn it around. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure if that's what I want to do with my life. And in the end, it'd be great to turn around a big established church and get it going for Jesus. But if that's going to take you 50 years, that's 50 years of people who will never hear the gospel and will never engage with a Christian community. And I don't think people in churches are the ones that we need to reach. I think it's everyone else who's not. So that's the great thing about doing a church plant. And it's hard, it's difficult. I don't want to poo-poo the idea of working in an established and existing church and trying to get things going there, because that's really important too. But
I get that, and I see from what you're saying too that you're talking about the imperative of being outward focused. And is that something that you've been working on in your church from day one? Do you, in fact, the people who've come to join you, are they sort of learning that idea too?
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we started with a vision of reaching new people and training and discipling Christians. And that was kind of our two-pronged attack in our vision statement. So that's what we wanted to do. And that meant whenever anyone joined our church, they heard from day one, this is kind of what you're joining. So if a Christian came along and said, I've moved into the area, I'm thinking about joining, we'd say to them, well, we've got a mission. Here's our mission. Do you want to come and join us? We're not trying to change something that's been done a certain way for a long time. So that's quite helpful. So yes, absolutely, outreach from day one was something that we did. We did lots of training, lots of talking about it. We now that we're a little down the track, we have an engaged team within the congregation who are responsible for promoting mission within the church. But it's always been a high priority for us. At least in theory. I think, there's been times where we haven't done it as well as we need to, or we've dropped the ball a bit. But that's certainly been something we've always done. And even things as simple as promoting evangelism in the church service. We'll have people get up and share their testimonies. That's not rocket science. We'll have someone stand up and share a story where they talk to their friend at work about Jesus and didn't go that well, or someone else who have tips for connecting with their neighbours. But we've always tried to make sure that's a priority for us. I don't think that's rocket science. I don't think other churches aren't doing that, and I think every church should be. So I think we're trying to do that.
Will you guys aim to be a church that plants another church? Do you see that in the future?
Yeah, we had an initial plan, 3 to 5 years. We'd like to do a second church plant. Now that we're kind of pushing upwards of 60 people, for the first couple of years, that was just forgotten about because you're in survival mode. We want to make sure we're here next week. We've got to meet our budget. Where we go and find people and meet them. And now that's back on the agenda a little bit. Yeah, and absolutely. And I think now that we've gone through the process of, all the stuff you've got to sign up for the government with your tax and your incorporated association and finding a place to meet and getting the right insurance, and now we've done all those things, I think we're probably in a great position to be able to help someone else do it too. We've got a trainee at the moment who's working for 4 days a week with us. He may... that's an idea that, we're still thinking about. We're wrestling with that idea. Should we keep growing if we've got a big momentum, or kind of split off and try and start somewhere else new? We haven't sorted that out yet, though.
It sounds like to you that it's a matter of wisdom as to timing, but it's something that you're going to go, yes, well, now let's become that established church.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, we haven't worked that out yet, I guess, Mark.
Yeah.
I haven't figured that out yet.
Tim, it sounds like you're very busy figuring out a lot of things associated with spreading the gospel, so I'm not going to in any way suggest that you can have this one to stick on top of your plate as well.
Well, no, if you figure these things out for me, just that'd be good.
Stay tuned to the website. That's all you need to do. Right. Tim, thanks very much for your time this morning. It's been brilliant talking to you, and God bless your work in Box Hill, and particularly amongst the Chinese community there. I think you're the person we're going to have to come and talk to in terms of how to actually break down doors in that area. It's going to be brilliant. Or at least maybe open them nicely rather than break them down.
Yeah, mate, the door's already open. We just need to get into it.
Yeah, thanks heaps. Best to your family, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.